Age of Ascension is the second set in the game of KeyForge, and in many ways it was quite similar to Call of the Archons. It included the same set of houses, and many of the same mechanics such as skirmish, capturing, etc. However, Age of Ascension was much more nuanced than Coda in the way it functioned. Combos were more precise, big plays required more setup than before, and the board became an integral factor of successful gameplay. AOA also introduced a brand new concept to the game, that of Alpha and Omega. Cards with Alpha can only be played if you haven't yet played, used, or discarded any cards that turn, and cards with Omega simply end the current step of your turn when you play them, making them the last card played. There were only a few cards in the set that possessed these keywords, and unfortunately, a number of the ones that did were pretty questionable in their quality, leading many players to wonder why those cards needed the Alpha or Omega to begin with. While the Omega cards, such as Dusk Witch and Unlocked Gateway, tended to make sense, many of the Alpha cards were extremely puzzling, and the Alpha keyword detracted significantly from their playability. This video will be analyzing the Alpha cards and why they seem to be so bad in many cases. There are only 14 cards in the whole game with the Alpha keyword, but before we get into the really awful Alpha cards, let's look at a few that actually make some sense. Binet Rupture is an especially tricky card that doubles both players' Ember when it's played, so the Alpha prevents you from gaining a whole bunch of Ember before playing it. This makes the timing of when it's played crucial, and it can be hard to optimize this card's value while trying to keep yourself from giving the opponent loads of free Ember. It also makes up half of the infamous Braid combo, and when played in the scenario, you want your opponent to have lots of Ember, to maximize the gain when Interdimensional Graft is played afterwards. Another card with a well-placed Alpha keyword, I believe, is Heist Knight, which reads, steal 1 Ember for each friendly thief creature. Heist Knight relies on you having a board of Shadows creatures already established, keeping you from playing down 3 or 4 Shadows creatures before Heist Knight. If Heist Knight didn't have Alpha, it would be way too easy to throw down a bunch of Shadows creatures for a massively unbalanced steal. Next is Early Birds, which readies each Shadows card. Obviously, the situations in which it would be used to its fullest potential are quite limited, since it relies on you not only having a Shadows board established already, but also on the opponent having exhausted it on their previous turn. Recognizing the limited uses Early Bird has, 2 Ember Pips were placed on it, making up for the lack of impact it has 90% of the time. The last one I like is Eureka, which reads, play, gain 2 Ember, archive 2 random cards. It's almost always worth it to play this one, even though it's the first card you need to play, since you're gaining half a key in the process of archiving 2 cards out of your hand. The risk comes in that you might archive cards you wanted to play that turn, so you really just need to determine for yourself if playing Eureka is worth it for you where you are in the game. Now, most of these other Alpha cards are either just kinda mediocre or straight up horrible. In Brobnar we have First Blood, which lets you deal 2 damage for each friendly Brobnar creature that can be divided among any number of creatures. This is one of those Alpha cards that really has no reason to have Alpha. Half the time this card is played, you won't have any Brobnar creatures out there, rendering First Blood useless aside from its Ember bonus. Without Alpha, the best you could do with this card is to first play out 2 or 3 Brobnar creatures, then deal 4 or 6 damage to a few creatures, maybe more if you had a really good Brobnar hand. One of the most infamous examples of a poorly placed Alpha keyword is with Gargantes Scrapper, who's one of the weakest Brobnar creatures out there and reads, if you have 3 Ember or more, deal 3 damage to an enemy creature. This card just needs to be deleted from existence. Why does it need Alpha? Why can't you first get up to 3 Ember, then deal a mere 3 damage to an enemy creature? Why does it have such a random effect that does so little? Everything about this card just makes you ask why, and as a result is up for contention as one of the worst, most hated cards in the game. Gargantes Scrapper is a prime example of a card used to experiment with a new keyword, and that experiment going horribly wrong. The last Brobnar Alpha card is Ragnarok, a funky, rare board wipe that reads, play. For the remainder of the turn, creatures cannot reap, and you gain 1 Ember whenever a friendly creature fights. At the end of the turn, destroy each creature. Ragnarok really just replaces the Ember you would get from reaping by getting it via fighting instead, and then blows everything up. The sequencing of the card doesn't make much sense to me. Why gain Ember from fighting into a board that's about to be destroyed anyway, instead of just reaping before the wipe happens? Perhaps this card has more uses than I'm aware of, and if so, you guys will have to let me know in the comments. Star Alliance only has 1 Alpha card, United Action, which reads, play, for the remainder of the turn you may play cards from any house for which you have a card in play. You cannot use cards this turn. I think being unable to use cards is a fair price for what the rest of the card offers, since under ideal circumstances you could just play out your entire hand, regardless of what house any of the other cards belong to. Clearly the card's potency increases based on how many houses you have present in your battle line, which is a very Star Alliance theme. House Shadows has not only Early Birds and Heist Knight, but 2 other Alpha cards in the form of Sucker Punch and Swindle, making them the house with the most Alpha cards. Sucker Punch reads, play, deal 2 damage to an enemy creature. If that creature is destroyed by this effect, archive Sucker Punch. It's nice for taking out a smaller enemy creature that may be protected by taunt or something, but sometimes there may be nothing out there that 2 damage will kill, creating a situation in which it would be nice to whittle down an enemy creature before sucker punching it. But if there are multiple targets that 2 damage will take out, it's nice to be archiving a card with a bonus pip turn over turn. Swindle is the only card in the game with both Alpha and Omega, meaning it's the one single card you'll get to play on your turn. In fact, it's the only thing that will happen on your turn. You'll call Shadows, play Swindle first because of the Alpha, then immediately end your turn because of the Omega. This makes sense because of its exceptional ability of simply stealing 3 Ember. That's a pretty insane effect, stealing half a key, most likely being used to take them off check and put yourself in check. Obviously, losing an entire turn to playing one single card can be a pretty sizable drawback, so the timing for playing Swindle is pretty important. House Saurian has 2 Alpha cards, the first one being So Salt, which makes it so creatures can't reap until the start of your next turn. That can be disruptive for the opponent, but can be just as disruptive for yourself half the time. Unless you've planned for a turn that consists of only fighting, perhaps setting up for a Coliseum cheat or something, being unable to reap is oftentimes pretty hurtful, at least to a small degree. Remove the Alpha, and you've essentially got yourself Inky Gloom, which is just easier and better to play much of the time. The other one is Diplomacy, which reads, play. Until the start of your next turn, each creature gains, before fight, exalt this creature. Diplomacy sets up incredibly well for Imperial Forge, or perhaps Ancient Power, but in most circumstances is just kind of annoying. Rarely do you want to put Ember on a creature you're about to fight with. Again, that can make it disruptive for the opponent, but also disruptive for yourself. The last 2 Alpha cards show up in House Untamed, first up being Bumblebird. This one falls victim to the same problem cards like First Blood have, in that you need to have a very specific board established for the card to be any good. Bumblebird puts 2 +1 power counters on each other friendly Untamed creature, which can be pretty solid if you have a board of Untamed creatures out there already. Finally, we have Glimmer, which reads, play, return a card from your discard pile to your hand. This is a card where I think the Alpha makes sense, since putting any card you want, some powerhouse card you've already played, back into your hand from your discard pile can be pretty darn strong. It's part of a better known combo involving Glimmer and Nature's Call, which can be extremely disruptive for the opponent, never really allowing them to establish any sort of board and constantly clogging up their hand. In the end, looking at the Alpha keyword throughout the sets it's appeared in, we can see in Age of Ascension it was very experimental. It was being slapped on all sorts of different cards to see what worked, and in a lot of cases it didn't work. First Blood, Bumblebird, Garganti Scrapper, and Sucker Punch are all cards that didn't really need Alpha, and hold back the card quite a lot. Other cards work well with Alpha, like Binate Rupture or Swindle. Moving into Worlds Collide, they still didn't seem to have a real grasp on what made an Alpha card successful, foolishly bringing back Garganti Scrapper and resulting in really weird cards like Ragnarok. Similar things happened in Mass Mutation, bringing back So Salt, Diplomacy, and Bumblebird, but took a step in the right direction with Heist Knight. And lastly, Alpha feels most comfortable in Dark Tidings, Eureka and United Action making a comeback, and the introduction of Early Birds. I'm excited to see what sorts of decisions Alpha brings us in future sets of KeyForge, and where it evolves from here. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on Alpha, any points I may have missed, and which Alpha card might be your favorite or least favorite. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.